Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, we'll look at the GOP National Convention and Arizona's impact on the gathering. And a new poll suggests that Joe Arpaio is facing a tight re-election race. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon's Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic, Howard Fisher of Capital Media Services, and Jim Small of the Arizona Capital Times. The Republican National Convention is in the books. Mary Jo, we had a couple of Arizonas take center stage, Senator Yee and Joe Arpaio.
Yes, Senator Yee, Kimberly Yee from Phoenix, had been on the agenda for quite some time, and she was invited to reflect some of the diversity in the party. She is the first Asian American woman to be elected to the Arizona legislature. We've had an Asian American male. So she spoke, and then late in the week, we hear from none other than Joe Arpaio after he'd been saying, I don't know why I wasn't asked.
He was grousing a little bit about that, wasn't he?
Yes, but then he announced that he did get a slot, and he spoke at 8 p.m. East Coast time on the same night as Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Yee's was, I think, the first night of the convention, told her family's story.
Yes.
A nice story, very uplifting story.
It's a very nice story. Kimberly is an interesting character. She's best known among those of us who cover the Capitol as being very anti-abortion. She's been the sponsor of many of these bills, and that certainly fits in with the agenda, I think, that Donald Trump is selling about his newfound opposition to abortion. But she doesn't always go along with the party. I mean, for example, she killed the bill that would have expanded the area you could have lighted billboards. And she also killed legislation that would have allowed new high-interest loans because she sided with the Democrats, said it wasn't fair. So she's sort of an interesting character within the party.
Does the fact that she was speaking that first night very heartily endorsing Donald Trump, does that make a difference here in Arizona as far as legislative races are concerned?
Oh, I don't know if it does. Certainly not for her. I don't think she even has a challenge. But it's certainly good exposure for her. It's good exposure for Arizona. I think if you can certainly look at it that way, that Arizona had the primetime speaking engagements for two different people. Obviously, Joe Arpaio is a known commodity nationally, but someone like Kimberly Yee, it's a good way for the party to recognize some of its up and coming people, and she's certainly been labeled as a rising star. She was just featured in Roll Call as one of the most influential state legislators across the country.
Interesting.
Yeah. And certainly, I'm sure she will make sure that her voters know about, her appearance at the RNC. It elevates, it gives her a bigger podium.
Yeah, of course, the thing we've all been looking at all week is at what point do some of the Republican voters say, I like Kimberly. Who's this orange-haired dude you got at the top of the ticket? And all the stuff he's been saying, he's promised everything to everyone. He sounded like FDR with his public works programs. Sounded a little like Hillary Clinton with we're going to have working leave for moms and stuff. And Lord knows how this all fits in.
Well, let's bring this back home a little bit then from the convention. I mean, is Donald Trump, is he the head of the Republican Party right now?
Yeah, of course. I mean, He's the presidential nominee. He's the one that leads, he's the first foot forward, and what he says, I think is people are going to have to either fall in line or disagree with it, just like any other presidential nominee would. I mean, I think you wouldn't say any different if, for Mitt Romney or for when John McCain was the nominee. I mean, I think that they are the titular head of the party.
Well, I bet you say, of course, and you wouldn't say any different, but those folks had lots of people there at the convention. Donald Trump had a mass exit. I mean, the home governor of the convention wasn't even there. I mean, he is the head of the Republic, and are Republicans happy about that?
Well, I think the question is unity, and we kept hearing that day after day that, okay, the party's unified, or we're unifying, we're getting together. And if there was any doubt in anybody's mind, Ted Cruz blew that, all to smithereens with his speech. The party's not unified, but yes, Trump is the nominee. He's the guy. If you're Republicans and you want to win in November, that's where you got to vote.
And that's the key, which is why so much of the 4 nights was about Hillary evil. Should be hung, should be shot, should be whatever, and that the world will end, and we'll all end up having to wear headscarves and convert to Muslim if Hillary gets elected. And that's the unifying theme, and he was he's the standard bearer on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a campaign event in the East Valley on Tuesday, and I talked to a lot of Republicans, a lot of activists, a lot of elected officials, just various people, campaign folks, and basically what you heard from everybody was, well, Trump, he wasn't my first choice, he wasn't my third choice, but we can't have 8 more years. 8 more years of Democrats. We can't have 8 years of Hillary. We can't go down that. These policies are bad. These are ruined. They're going to ruin America. And so that really is, it's like, well, I'm going to vote for Trump. I don't like it. I don't really like him, but he's better than the alternative.
Now, that said, I mean, there are some Republicans who aren't going to vote for Trump. I mean, it's sort of pretty clear from the signals that they're sending. They don't know where they're going to go, and you don't necessarily have to vote, although, the way these elections play out, usually if you don't vote for one, it throws the favor to the other leading candidate. But, there is a Libertarian ticket, and there's a Green Party ticket as well.
And we're going to get to that Green Party ticket in a second here. But as far as next week now, we have the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Sounds like Representative Gallego will be speaking, and Gabby Giffords will be speaking.
Gabby Giffords, of course, the fact is that, you sort of, I hate to say it, you pull her out when you need somebody to talk about your message. She got national attention even before she was shot. Certainly she's become the poster child for quote unquote gun regulation. We're not taking away your guns. Remember, we're just doing some reasonable regulation, 10 rounds and perhaps some gun show checks. And she'll get a very good reception there. She's still speaking haltingly, but she's getting her message out.
I was going to say, it seems as though, from what we've heard from her, she's doing a lot better as far as how she speaks.
She is, but as Howie said, she does speak haltingly, and I think that's a reminder of the damage that was caused by the wound she sustained. I mean, she's still with us, and it sounds everything's clicking there, but the bullet takes a toll.
Look, and I was working the day she was shot, and I'll tell you, based on what we heard and saw of her injuries and what we got from University Medical Center, I was sure we were going to be writing an obit on her. So the fact that she's come this far is chilling and amazing.
All right, so a couple of prominent Arizonans there at the convention next week for the Democrats. Let's get to a local election. Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who spoke at the Republican convention, is running for sheriff of all the people again. And the latest poll, now let's talk about this poll for a second here, but the latest poll shows he's not beating the Democrat.
Yeah, no, it was a poll put out by a Republican consulting firm. It was an automated poll, compared him against his Democratic opponent, Paul Penzone, and showed him losing both when undecideds were included and when people were taken out, when those undecideds were taken out, when they were kind of pushed into, how will you actually vote? It's definitely, he's very clearly in trouble. This is going to be, he's been saying for a long time, this is the toughest race I'm going to have. And it's not just campaign hyperbole. I mean, I think that is a very true statement. This is the second poll we've seen. There was another poll that was put out from a firm that was linked, that has ties to the Penzone campaign, that was a live caller poll that also showed that race, showed Penzone basically in a position to win that race.
Well, but let's also understand the timing of this. These polls are being conducted. Heck, he was in court today. Flew back on the red eye to go to court to have the judge basically whack him upside the head and say, I may refer you for criminal contempt. He's also got a huge bankroll. And, it's amazing what you can do between now and November with $10 million.
It is, but the same poll shows Donald Trump leading Hillary Clinton by 9 points. And Trump and Arpaio are, kind of a Tweedledee-Tweedledum kind of situation there. If Trump's doing really well, what happened to all those Trump folks supposedly with Arpaio?
Well, the difference is Hillary has high negatives. Penzone is sort of, who? They vaguely remember, gee, didn't he run before, and didn't he run as a Republican? And I appreciate that they're cut from the same cloth. Same thing with Jan Brewer. You might find the same sort of polling on her. But the fact is that this is a negative on Hillary. I mean, this is a campaign, the presidential campaign, where it's people holding their nose, and you actually got a situation where Trump and Clinton are running against the only two people who they could beat, which is just as sad as the democracy has become.
But I think what this poll also shows is that, will there be a crossover effect? I mean, if you're voting for the Republican at the top of the ticket for the presidential, are people inclined to cross over on lower down on the ballot? And in Maricopa County, to think that voters would do that, pretty strong Republican area. I don't know. There's a little weariness about Sheriff Joe, and also a lot of love.
Yeah, when you dig down into the numbers in that poll, they showed Arpaio was losing almost 1 out of every 5 Republican voters, which is a very large number. And similarly, independents, he was getting creamed among independents. It was like, I think only 33% of independents were supporting Sheriff Joe, and I think it was like 55 or something like that were supporting Penzone, or supporting his opponent at the very least. So, and those were numbers that you didn't see reflected on the presidential one. When you looked at those, there was more Republican hegemony, where they were sticking with Trump as opposed to defecting away.
And we're going to come back to the timing again. If he's referred over for criminal prosecution, and if several weeks before the election he's suddenly indicted or on trial.
We're talking about Joe Arpaio.
I understand. Look, believe me, this guy, has defied political gravity for years. But who knows? He may also. Here's the other funny thing. It's a criminal problem. I can see him entering into, for lack of a better word, a plea agreement. You don't prosecute me, I won't run for re-election.
That's been the rumor out there the whole time, that there might be some sort of deal where he says, I'll go away if you go away. All right. Green Party, we mentioned the Green Party. It sounds like the Green Party will be on the November ballot, even though they didn't quite do the right thing. What's going on here?
Well, yeah, the Green Party in Arizona missed the deadline to submit the petitions to get their electors on the November 8th ballot. That deadline's June 1. They didn't know about it, and the Secretary of State's office said we can't let you on after the fact. A deadline's a deadline. So the Greens sort of lawyered up, went to court real quickly, and said, look, we didn't get any notice from the Secretary of State's office. We've had notice in past years, and besides, that deadline's really, really early compared to other states, and made a bunch of arguments. And ultimately, a federal magistrate said, well, okay, here's the deal. I'll let you on. And
this is the key, that early deadline that Mary Jo mentioned, because it was so early. You figure, look, the Democrats and Republicans at the time hadn't even had their conventions, hadn't even officially had their candidate, and to somehow suggest, no, you need to have your electors in by June 1st. That was so early that even Michelle Reagan essentially confessed judgment in the case and said, I will not fight a judgment where you order me to ignore the June 1st deadline, and I will put it on there. So we didn't even have that. And the other thing that Reagan said is, look, they have a point. That June 1st deadline for electors for a November election, we haven't even printed up the primary ballots for half these things. I'll work to have that changed to the legislature.
What do you make of all this?
Yeah, the courts, I think, have historically erred on the side of letting voters have more options. So if there's something like this, some of these technical deadlines, I think we've seen this in the past, where the courts, if there's kind of a gray area, they're gonna defer to the side of the voters and say, okay, we'll make sure that the voters have every option. They're not going to be disenfranchised.
Is this another example, though, of the Secretary of State's office in the news when it doesn't necessarily have to be?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the Green Party people, they're saying, in past presidential years, we got notices, we got heads up on when these things are due, and there has been turnover in the elections division at the Secretary of State's office, but there's nothing in state law that requires them to, knock on your door and send you out a notice. That said, the Green Party is very small. It's a very small, little operation in this state, and they don't have a full-time executive director who keeps on top of all the statutory deadlines.
And they're disorganized. They'd been in court a couple of years ago because they fell below the threshold for registrants, and then they went to court and said, "Well, wait, what about us?" And, at a certain point, there's an obligation on party officials. If you want to be an quote-unquote organized party, there are certain legal requirements you have to meet.
You've got to get yourself organized. Corporation Commission we got 3 Republican Corporation Commission they're running as a team, Jim.
Yeah.
They're running as a team, and they're all Republicans, but there are 5 Republicans, I believe, in this race. How come the other 2 aren't joining the other 3?
Well, because there's only 3 seats. That's why. I mean, if you're going to run as a team, you're going to run as a team of 3. You're not going to run as a team of 5 for 3 spots.
So basically, they picked the 3. But I guess my point is, why did these 3 decide to band together?
These 3, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is a marriage of convenience. I mean, the Corporation Commission is an odd race. It's a tough race to run. It's tough to raise money for. Two of these candidates are clean elections candidates, which has been the norm over the last decade, 15 years. One of them, former House Speaker Andy Tobin, he was appointed to the commission earlier this year. He's running traditional, raising money from private sources. So essentially, there's an efficiency. You pool your money, you're able to split costs on mailers, you can maybe do some advertising on radio or TV or internet or whatever, but you can diffuse the costs. These three got together because one of them, the other incumbent running, Bob Burns, has ostracized himself largely from the current members of the commission and the other candidates. He's been very outspoken and has made it a central plank of his campaign, really, to force Arizona Public Service and Pinnacle West to disclose any campaign funding, spending they may have done 2 years ago. So he hasn't made himself any friends there. And the other one, Boyd Dunn, I think is, I'm not quite sure why he wasn't in the mix, but certainly Tobin, Rick Gray, and Al Melvin all served together in the legislature.
I think part of the reason Boyd Dunn wasn't in the mix is, Boyd was a judge for a long time and sees these things, and I went to a debate earlier this week and sees these things not so much in the black and white, the Andy Tobin on one side and the Bob Burns on the other in terms of APS, but also sees the commission as a judicial body and judge things on the evidence, whereas everyone else is pretty much a politician in there, and I think that's why he also wound up on the odd end.
Explain it to me though again here. You've got two people running as clean, one person running with traditional funds. They will pool their resources. Doesn't that negate the purpose of clean elections?
Well, this is where it gets real tricky, and Jim's seen this too. Where you can form tickets. Clean elections, let's just say Tom Collins, who's an executive director, will be keeping an eye on that, but you are allowed to form alliances and coalitions.
Yeah, and they can do it, they can pool their money, but the way it works is, so obviously two of them will have the same amount of money, third one will have a different amount, but they all have to split the costs evenly. So anything that they do jointly, if they put out a mailer with all three of their faces on it, they've got to split that cost evenly. So if it's entirely possible they get to a situation where two of the candidates have money left in the bank and one doesn't. In which case, that's going to have to change the strategy, obviously, and it's incumbent on whatever strategy they come up with to ensure that Andy Tobin is able to, at the very least, match the same amount of money that the other two have. Otherwise, there's going to be some unequal distribution of costs.
Or it could actually go the other way, because the Corporation Commission candidates, the amounts, this isn't like the governor's race. The amounts are fairly limited for the primary, and Tobin, particularly as an incumbent, might be able to raise a lot of money, and all of a sudden he's got more money than they do, and all of a sudden he's the one out there with a single race. Yeah. Again, it's very tricky, and you can bet that if you start seeing some ticket stuff, somebody's going to file a complaint at the commission.
Again, does this making sense to you?
Well, you need a spreadsheet or a pie chart really to sort of show how that works out. But the wild card in this is that there could be independent expenditures. We saw a lot of those last time there was a corporation commission race.
You mean possibly independent expenditures, possibly financed by the state's largest electric utility, which has neither confirmed nor denied that it is in fact interested in who regulates it.
Correct. So it's
shocking.
something like that surfaces again, and I don't know, with the FBI in town looking at the at Arizona Public Service and looking at some of the Corporation Commission and probably some other affiliated entities, perhaps this kind of independent expenditure won't surface.
This will be one of the more interesting and volatile, I would imagine, Corporation Commission races. I mean, most folks go to the Corporation Commission to disappear. I mean, there's no hiding now.
Big bright spotlight on there.
Yeah.
It has been really for 3 years. They've started in 2013. There were a couple of really substantive policy issues that attracted a lot more attention than we usually see. We see that once a decade usually at the CorpCom, and we're now going 3 years strong into it.
Minimum wage initiative has been targeted here. Involves, I guess, signatures to raise the minimum. We talked about the actual initiative itself. Signatures in. Now what? The signature's no good? What's the deal?
The claim, these things, all three initiatives have in fact drawn lawsuits, one form or another. One of the claims in this one is that the circulators, the people who gather the 25 signatures per page, some of them were ineligible, which is part of the reason that the foes went to court and said, well, wait, don't send out those petitions for verification of the signatures on the front, because we think we can knock off some of the signatures on the back. And the judge said, we're not going to hold up the process for you. Look, foes are throwing everything they have at all three of these, raising issues of single subject, raising issues of confusion, raising issues of the validity of the circulators, I'm surprised they're not raising issues about the typeface, you know, and whether was it 8-point or 9-point type. Yeah. But this is the kind of thing. It's cheaper to pay lawyers $450 an hour to kill a $12 minimum wage than it is to spend $5 million in November to try to kill it.
Is this minimum wage initiative, and let's just assume that it's going to make the ballot. I mean, is this the kind of thing that we are going to? This could be a pretty loud fight, correct?
Oh, very much. I mean, it'll be a loud fight, just like it was a decade ago when Arizona established its own minimum wage. The stakes are, well, let's see, in 2006. So that was a presidential year as well. This has the potential to bring out certain classes of voters who may not otherwise show up at elections as well. So that raises the stakes.
Yeah, and you've also got sort of a quasi-parallel measure on the ballot put in by the SEIU, which is a California union, to cap the wages of non-medical personnel at hospital at $216 an hour.
And we've discussed that one. It's almost as if it's an interloper sort of effort there. These folks in California couldn't get their way, so they're coming over here.
They're coming over here. Well, they're still trying in California. There was some legal reason it got bounced off the ballot in 14 and then again in 16, but they're still going to pursue it here. And then, of course, the granddaddy of them all, which is going to be massive, which we're talking about, has to do with, of course, medical marijuana.
Let's talk about money for the marijuana initiative, campaign finance report. Jim, your paper reporting that this big, wide group, this groundswell of folks that are pushing this are basically just folks that are involved in the marijuana industry.
Yeah, so the legalization campaign had their leader had been out making speeches, and one of his refrains frequently was, we've got a lot of support. We've got support from all kinds of, from tourism, from agriculture, from different sectors that they're backing our campaign. Yeah. Okay, well, campaign finance reports came out, and we looked at it and went through it, and they may be backing it, but they're certainly not writing checks to it. And so that was, made a call to them and say, hey, your leader keeps saying that you guys are being supported by this, but where is this support? All we see are medical marijuana dispensaries, who are basically the people who get a foot in the door. They get the first crack at being able to sell recreational marijuana in the event that this passes. They're the ones that stand to profit, obviously, off of this. And they're the ones kicking the money in.
What did they say to you? When you called them and said, where are these other construction and agriculture people?
They basically said, those people had told us, they told us they support us. Our director, our leader, thought that meant that they'd written checks. They haven't. We're going to go twist some arms and make sure that they write us those checks that we've said that they've written us, basically.
Yeah, and of course, I love the fact they say, well, the tourism industry supports us, yet the actual tourism council, the association, is on the other side of it. They're not convinced that people are going to be flocking to Arizona to buy, $350 an ounce marijuana or whatever it is. Jim's keyed in on the key point of this. It's supposed to be regulating marijuana like alcohol, but there's a couple of interesting differences, including that you would only be allowed initially 147 dispensaries to sell the stuff statewide for 6.6 million people. Of that, anybody who now has a medical marijuana dispensary, and there's about 98 of them, they get one, that's it. And then anyone else may be able to get in, and no more until at least 2021. And so you're building up this basic, it's not quite a monopoly when you have 147, but you're basically giving somebody a leg up to be able to make a profit.
It's darn near a closed system is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, with the preference going first to the dispensaries, which is why they're putting all the money into this ballot measure.
Well, and this arrangement is a function of the negotiations that happened 2 years ago in order to move this thing forward. I mean, there was going to be a marijuana legalization thing on the ballot, won't come hell or high water. And so the dispensaries realized that their owners realized that they stood to lose a lot of money that they'd invested in these dispensaries, and so this was a way to try to make everybody happy and bring them all on board.
And that gets to the other really quickly.
I got to stop you right there. Sure. I know you love talking about medical marijuana.
Dude.
Just marijuana in all respects, but cool it, man. Cool it. Monday on Arizona Horizon, we discuss concerns over the use of personal information in the game Pokemon Go. And we'll look at the state of the golf industry in the Phoenix area. That's Monday on Arizona Horizon. Tuesday, we'll break down new numbers on childhood hunger in Arizona. Wednesday, Phoenix Mayor Greg Stanton joins us in studio. Thursday, hear about SRP's efforts to produce electricity out of forest biomass. And Friday, it's another edition of the Journalist Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.